Thinking as we were singing that little chorus, you in your small corner and I in mine. There are times that we have to do that. You have to go to your place of work, and I to mine. You to your realm of influence, and I to mine. But aren't you glad when we can come together and let our lights shine together? When I first started hearing the reports of snow and possibility, and they were called maybe at one time, a few days ago, of us getting 3 or 4 inches or something like that, I said, Lord, I sure would hate to miss church. I just love being together with God's people, being able to come and encourage one another, worship together. And I don't know about you, but it just kind of messes the week up when we can't be together to worship. And I'm thankful the Lord answered that prayer and allowed us to be able to be here together. And isn't God good? All the time, God is good. Well, if you have your Bibles, we'd invite you to turn to Exodus chapter 20. We're going to begin a series entitled Conquering the Gods. Conquering the Gods. Now, lest you misunderstand and think that I'm talking about overtaking God, I didn't say God, I said gods with a small g. Because there are things in our lives that exist that have power over us, that control us, that really, if we're quite honest, dictate to us what we do and what we don't do. And many times those things take the place of the God, the true and living God, and keep us from enjoying that relationship with Him, and a lot of times leads to misery and different things. And I was thinking about some of you from your Marvel days and things with Captain America, and how in his fight he was fighting against one evil guy, bad guy, and the person looked at Captain America and said, if only you would use your power right, you could walk among the gods. Now what he was saying was, if you weren't trying to help out other people and you used it for yourself, then you could make yourself as a god. Well, that sounds tempting, doesn't it? Sometimes young people, they hear that and say, that's what I want to be. And we look at kids and think, well, that's just immaturity. But really, if we're honest, as adults, we think the same thing. I want to be in control. I want to have the authority and the power. And when we do, folks, we mess our lives up completely. And I hope you'll see over the next couple weeks how this reaches down into every facet of our life. But this morning, we're going to look at the first part, and that is this. All gods, lower g, are personal. All gods are personal. Look at Exodus chapter 20. Look at what God says to the nation of Israel. Verse 1, and God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Now I want you to notice that last part. He could have just left it at, brought you out of the land of Egypt. But he didn't. He wanted to make the point, and he was reminding the nation of Israel, you were under bondage. That word there for bondage means to be yoked down, to be servants. You have no choice. You are told what to do, when to do it. And he said, remember those days, children? Remember when you were in that house of bondage? Now look at verse 3. He says to them, the first of the 10 commandments, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Now, when God is saying this, remember what He's just told them. I've delivered you out of the land of Egypt. I've delivered you out of bondage. Now, children, don't go back into bondage. Don't put any other gods, lower g, before me. Now, here's what I want you to see. These gods don't exist unless the nation of Israel makes them exist. These gods were not real entities. They were the ones that the nation of Israel was bringing before God and saying, here's what I choose. Here's what I choose to worship. Those gods are personal. Gods that you serve may not be gods that are tempting to me. The gods that I serve might not be tempting to you. They're personal. You ever found yourself looking at someone who is addicted to drugs? If you ever want to get a true look into what it's like to be a drug addict, talk to one. They'll tell you. They're very open about it. And you look at somebody that is addicted to drugs, and they will sell their soul to get their next hit. And maybe you said this, I don't understand that. Why would you harm your body? Why would you sell all that you have and be penniless? Why would you, in some cases, the one young man a couple years ago killed his grandmother for $5 so he could get some more drugs. And we look at that and go, how do you explain that? You see, we can look at other people and their gods and go, that makes no sense to me. But then they could look at us and say, well, what about you? I remember a long time ago, there was a gentleman, I'm told, that was concerned about people smoking. And so he went to talk to the people that were smoking to encourage them to give up smoking. Don't become addicted to that nicotine. And as I am told, the one guy looked at the guy confronting him and said, I tell you what, I'll give up smoking when you give up gluttony. The guy looked at him and boy, he was furious. How dare he point the finger back at him? But folks, is it true? We can look at somebody else and go, how can you have those gods? But we better check our own house to make sure we don't have any gods. To make sure we don't have something that we're bondage to, that we're bowing down to. And so God says to the nation of Israel, don't bring any other gods before me. Really what he's saying in their context is, don't have them in my presence. You're the one bringing them in because they don't exist. It's like a child. I'll never forget, I think Gwen's downstairs, when Anna was very small, we were going to walk home after church one night. Going to go through the cemetery. And she said, Daddy, can we go a different way? Well, we could, but it's a whole lot farther around if we just cut through there. I said, why? Miss Gwen told me that there might be ghosts out here. Now, did those ghosts exist? No. But once that idea was planted, guess where they did exist? In Anna's mind. Well, fast forward, last week, Ransom and Hannah had the activity here for the teens, and so Cam went home with me, and we watched him till they got done. As soon as we rounded that corner and got where it was dark, Camden calls me Poppy. Camden goes, hold Poppy, hold Poppy. And I picked him up. I said, boy, this brings back memories. Once we got through the darkness of the cemetery and got over to the light of the flagpole, down, he was good then. You see, those things didn't exist, but in their minds, it does. God says, don't bring any other gods before me. Now, he's going to elaborate on that with the second one. And he says in verse 4, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. You see, because you're the one that's giving power to this God, you're the one that has to create the image of it. You ever notice that? There is no other image. You're not just bringing it in. You're creating the image of that. You're fashioning it to how you want it to be. You see, folks, when we have gods in our lives, we fashion them to what we feel comfortable with. And if we're honest, and time won't permit us today, that's how a lot of the cults get started today. They took the idea of God who has always been. And they took and said, you know, there's certain things we like about that and certain things we don't. So we're going to create our own form of religion. We're going to create our own form of God. And we're going to call him something different. Maybe we call him Buddha. Maybe we call him Allah. Maybe we call him one of the 3 million gods that they serve in India. And so we're going to change and mix things up so that it's comfortable for us. Now, we look at that and we've been raised better, and we say, well, there's not Allah or Buddha or anything. But in our own lives, we come up with gods that we feel comfortable with. Sometimes it is the god of leisure. That it's okay to sacrifice certain things because, you know, I got to have a break and I've got to, release the energy and do those types of things. And so we put leisure up there. Sometimes it's the god of entertainment. You ever hear somebody talk about a movie and they'll say something like this? Well, the language was bad and there's some other things that were bad, but you can't expect perfection, so it's okay. Leisure, entertainment begins to be the god to dictate what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. Sometimes it is the god of control. How much control do you have to have in your life? Sometimes it's the god of power. I want to be the one in charge. Sometimes it's the god of desires. There are many, many gods, folks, that we have accepted as okay. God says to the nation of Israel, don't make any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Why? Because God created it. You see, when we understand that God is creator, there's nothing there that God did not create, so there cannot be any other gods. In fact, Moses tried to get this through the people. Hold your place here and turn over to Deuteronomy chapter 4. Moses comes out point blank and tells the nation of Israel this truth so that we understand it. Deuteronomy 4:35. Unto thee it was showed that thou mightest know that the Lord, He is God. Then look at this next statement. There is none else beside Him. Period. I love periods. The thought is concluded. There is none beside Him. No other gods. So there is no God out there that is competing for your time that can determine or demand of you service unless you allow it. Well, that kind of puts the weight back on us, doesn't it? Sometimes, well, I can't help it. Yeah, you can. It may be hard, but you can help it. You don't have to serve certain things. Only God. Now go back to Exodus 20 and look at what he says at the end, or in verse 5 then. When you understand that gods are personal and they're the gods that you have created and you give power to, look at verse 5. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them. Don't forget, the them are the gods you've created. The gods you've made the image to. So he says, you shall not bow down to them, nor serve them. I mentioned earlier about the young man that killed his grandma for $5 so he could get another fix. Those drugs, the only reason that they had power over him was because he gave that power to them. He yielded and partook of it and went back and partook again, and they then had power over him, and he had to serve them. You say, Randy, what do you mean he had to serve them? Folks, thanks be to God, I don't know what it's like for drugs to have power over me. I don't say that pridefully. I say that in all thanks to the grace of God that I don't know that. But I have talked with people that have, and it is unreal, the power that it holds. And your body I have seen people go through detox. If you ever want to be scared out of your mind and never drink a drop of alcohol or do any kind of drugs, go and watch people go through detox. And their bodies will just literally start to shake and convulse because their body is calling out for it. You see, they've become a servant to it. Did they have to? No. They chose to. For whatever reason, they chose to. Sometimes, and I know this seems very, very minor, but it helps us to get a feeling of it. If you try to give up something, maybe you try to give up chocolate. You ever find yourself going, "Oh, I sure would love to have a piece of chocolate"? For some of you, have you ever tried to give up coffee? You hear people say, "Don't talk to me till I have my first cup of coffee." Well, if you are used to the caffeine that coffee gives to you and then you try to stop, guess what starts to happen? You get a headache. You kind of start to get the jitters. I need a cup of coffee. Now, that's very minor, but it shows things can come in and have control over us that sometimes we don't even realize that they do. Sometimes what people think about us has control over us. And we'll go to great lengths so that we make sure nobody can say anything about us, and we want everybody to be happy with us. We call those sometimes people pleasers. They can drive themselves crazy if somebody gets upset with them. There are many, many different examples. But he says to them, "Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them." Notice that reflexive pronoun. One day, listen to me carefully, one day everyone will stand in the presence of God. And one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Why will that happen? Because He is God and He will make it happen. Look at what He says of these gods. Do not bow down yourself to them. You're the one bowing down. They can't make you. You choose to bow down to them. You choose to give them power, to give them control. And God says to the people, don't do that. It's going to be later on in Israel's history that they're going to come up with an idea to have a king. And God says to them, you don't want a king. Oh, yes, we do. All the other nations have one. It's what we want. So He tells Samuel, okay, anoint Saul as king. And the people will go on to regret that decision. You see, there are times we think we know what's best. God, I've got this. This is okay. I can handle this. And we don't see the full picture. Somebody says, well, Randy, isn't the devil a god? No, sir. The devil is no god. The devil's powerful. The Bible calls him the prince of this world, but he is no god, because there is only one God. Just in case you want to be reminded of that, 1 John chapter 4, verse 4 says this, greater is He that is in us than he that is in this world. The devil is no God. There's only one God. That's Yahweh. There's only one God, the true and living God. And so He says, do not bow down yourself to them. Look at what it says next. Or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or is in the earth beneath. I'm sorry, that's back in verse 4. Back in verse 5. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God. Now that sounds bad, doesn't it? That sounds bad. That sounds like God's being petty. Because we often think of jealousy as only in a negative term. Right? The green-eyed monster. Right? Remember when Barney looks at Thelma Lou and he says, Thelma Lou, you've got a bad case of that green-eyed monster, jealousy. It's a negative thing in our world. But when God is using it here, the word jealous here is not in a negative sense. It means this. I want your complete attention. You see, God knows if we start looking in other places, we're going to mess up. We're going to get empty. I can't tell you the number of times that I have heard people be in my office or on the phone and tell me, I thought my wife or my husband was the worst thing around. And so I had an affair. And now I would give anything to go back to that day. See, sometimes we can look around and be like, well, it should be better over there. No. When we don't do it God's way, we make a mess of things. And so when God says to us, for I am a jealous God, it means this: I want your complete attention. Because I will do that which is right for you, that which is good for you. Folks, He doesn't beat us like slaves. He doesn't mistreat us. His ways are good. What is our church verse? Romans 8:28. And we know that God works all things together for good to them who love God, to those that are called according to His purpose. Notice what God works it for. Good. Folks, in my life, in my 45 years of living, there have been times I thought I knew better than what God was doing. And I try to take matters into my own hands. And I wish I could change every single time I did that. But never once have I regretted following God, bowing to His will, following His way. You see, folks, whatever God that you have, whatever God that you serve, maybe it's the God of power, maybe it's the God of pride, maybe it's the God of fame, maybe it's the God of lust, maybe it's the God of money, maybe it's the God of bitterness, maybe it's the God of anger, maybe it's the God of unforgiveness. You see how many gods there are, and I'm just getting started. Whatever God you have set up in your life, don't miss this, is because you and I refuse to accept that aspect of God. Let me say that again. Whatever God you are serving, you have set up because you don't like that particular aspect of God. Judas had the chance to follow Jesus around the earth, to watch Him, to listen to Him, to hear Him. What was Judas's problem? He didn't like Rome. He wanted to be in power over Rome. And so he thought Jesus was going to set up His kingdom here. You see, Judas served the God of power. And he thought Jesus could get that for him. But when he found out he couldn't, what did he do? I'll betray you. I'll get 30 pieces of silver. I can use that to set up my own economy, my own establishment, to have some semblance of power. Because he didn't like the fact that Jesus came to be the atonement for sin and not to reign. You see, when I set up the God of anger, it's because I don't like what God's done. I don't like how things have happened. So you know what? Either I can submit to that and say, okay, Lord, I don't understand it, but you're God. Or I can say, you know what? I refuse to accept it. I will not accept that outcome. And so I set up the God of anger. And then I try to get other disciples. You ever done that? You take a certain stance and you say, oh yeah, I'm going to get. So you start going around people and you start pulling people. Wouldn't you respond that way? Well, yeah, I would. Good. See, I've got a disciple. I'm not in this alone. You see, those personal gods get set up when we don't like what the true God is doing. When He says don't do something, and that's what we want to do, we'll find a God that will let us do it. This truth really stood out to me when I was over in India in 2004. If you've ever noticed the Hindu people, they'll, in this area of their forehead, they will decorate it. There will be different dots, different size of dots, different mixture of dots, and other different things, but they'll put right here. And so I asked one of the priests one time when we were there, I said, why all the different markings? And they said, well, we have 3 million different gods that we serve. 3 million? Why? He said, well, for example, for today, my wife, now this is all through an interpreter, my wife is sick. So I am wearing this one because I'm praying to, and he named the god, I don't remember the name, that this God would heal my wife today. Once she gets better, then I will change to a different God. And boy, the Lord just kind of took that and hit me right between the eyes, pun intended, and said, isn't that what you do, Randy? When I don't do what you want me to do, then you go off and do your own thing. You start serving a different God. You start looking for revenge when somebody's wronged you. You start looking for opportunities when you think that I've shut those opportunities off. I remember one time, Kathy and I were newly married, and there was some opportunities that were coming up for me. And here's the direction I wanted to go. And every time I wanted to go that direction, God would close the door. You know how frustrating that is? Well, you would think somebody would get the idea and say, okay, Lord, apparently that's not where you want to go. But that's not true, and that's the direction you want to go. So you start trying to find other ways to get there. You start trying to find rationale. People come, don't you think this makes sense? Wouldn't you do it this way? And we try to force the way. That's what the nation of Israel did. It's what Randy Kelly does sometimes. It's what you do sometimes. And God says, if you want what's best, have no other gods before me. Don't make any images of anything. And he puts it there, in the heavens, on the earth, under the earth, everywhere. Don't make any graven image, and don't bow yourself down to them. For all you're doing is going back to the bondage that I set you free from. Remember what he just told them earlier? I am the Lord thy God. I brought you out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. Who did it? The nation of Israel help? Mm-mm. God did it. God himself. So church, I want to ask you this question. First of all, do you have any other gods before the true and living God? Are there things in your life that you know are not right with him? Things that you are doing because you've not liked the direction that God has taken you. You need to get those right. You need to break down those altars and say, Lord, I don't want those things. I don't want those in my life. I don't want those things to be there. I want them broken down. And then to come back to that statement that I just quoted. Lord, you are my God. Lord, you are the one that saved me. Because you see, when Jesus hung on a cross like that one, I didn't have anything to do with it. It wasn't my good works mixed with his that made me righteous. In fact, I did have something to do with it. It was my sin that nailed him to that cross. But I do receive forgiveness of sin because of what Jesus did. I go back and read that verse that's often quoted so many times, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. See, I had nothing to do with it. Church, it's easy to say, I serve the one true living God. I don't serve a false God. I don't serve Allah. I don't serve Buddha. I don't serve any of those. But have you set up your own? Have you set up those things that control you? Anger can control you. Bitterness can control you. Lust can control you. Envy can control you. Have you set up gods that control you, that you bow down to? Maybe you look for ways to get even with people. Let all that go. Let God be God. Let those other gods that you and I have created go. And let him be the Lord your God that delivers you out of the house of bondage. Father, thank you for the truth of your word today. Father, many times we are so quick to think that we do not have any other gods before you. But Father, if we're honest, there's a good possibility we do. But Father, I'm sure there are those here this morning that are walking. But Father, it's important for each of us to examine our own lives and to see, have we created any gods? Have we set up any gods in our life that we worship, that we serve? Father, I pray that you would help us to be honest before you. Heads are bowed, eyes are closed, no one's looking around.